Before everything unraveled, my life was straightforward. Some might even call it dull. I had a routine that felt safe and predictable, filled with work, home, and the occasional night out. Stacy and I had been together for years. Our marriage wasn't flawless, but it was comfortable. We had our highs and lows, but we always managed to find our way back to each other. I remember when things started to change, creeping in like a slow, creeping mist. I started feeling unsettled, questioning if this was all there was to life. The spark in our relationship had dimmed, and I began noticing things I hadn't before. Stacy seemed distant, always lost in her work, and I felt more like a roommate than a husband. That growing void inside me began to gnaw at my insides. Most people assume my job is dull, just crunching numbers. As a senior auditor, I lead a team that digs deep into the finances of businesses and individuals, especially when the IRS comes knocking. When they launch an investigation, we're the ones who sift through the books, sometimes for weeks on end. The work is typically routine, but today's shock didn't come from the audit itself. It came from what I saw outside the window. For the past 3 weeks, my team and I have been knee-deep in an audit of Zenith Holdings, a company under scrutiny for mishandling contracts and cooking the books. This isn't the first time the state has gone after them, and I'm not sure we can save them this time. My team consists of 3 expert analysts, Jared, Nick, and Casey, who are wizards at uncovering hidden data. Then there's Jess and Maria, 2 relentless accountants who won't let anything slip through the cracks. My role is to manage the client relationship and pull together the final audit report. Zenith provided us with luxurious offices on the 19th floor of a skyscraper, complete with panoramic views and all the tech we needed. My temporary office, at one end of the floor, actually belongs to a managing partner on leave. It's an extravagant space, full of dark wood furniture and a massive mounted sailfish. A glimpse into how Zenith spends its money. During a break, I found myself gazing out the window at the office building across the street. That's where Nexus Innovations, the company Stacy works for, is located. I couldn't see much from my desk, but I knew her office was on the 18th floor. Eventually, I managed to spot the right set of windows, but I couldn't make out anything inside. That's when I noticed a large brass telescope in the corner of my borrowed office. Curious, I adjusted it and focused on Stacy's office. There she was, clear as day, sitting at her desk. As I watched, my mind drifted to memories of her at home, her smile lighting up the room, and the way she'd slip into that black silk lingerie I had bought for her in Italy. The ring of my phone snapped me back to reality. "Hello," I answered. "Hey, boss," Jess said. "We're heading to lunch. Casey found this great little cafe nearby that might become our go-to spot. Want to join?" "Thanks, but I've got some calls to make." "Could you bring me a chicken salad sandwich and a soda? Maybe tomorrow." "Sure thing. Just don't forget to take a break and head home at a reasonable hour." "Will do, thanks." After I hung up, my curiosity got the better of me, and I returned to the telescope. This time, Stacy wasn't alone. A man from her office holiday party, Tom, I think his name was standing close, leaning against her desk. I never liked how much time he spent with her, but she always shrugged it off, saying he was her supervisor, and that she needed to keep him happy to get ahead. I hadn't given it much thought until now. I watched as they chatted, seemingly about work, but then he closed the door to her office and pulled up a chair beside her. Stacy put her feet, still in those sheer stockings, on his knees, and he began massaging them. My heart raced. I thought I was the only one who did that for her. His hands moved slowly up her legs, and Stacy leaned back, eyes closed, clearly enjoying it. I could barely breathe as I muttered, "What's going on?" Stacy looked like she was in heaven as he worked his way up her calves, even spreading her knees apart. My heart pounded in my chest as I began pacing the room. I grabbed my phone and dialed her office number with trembling hands. Stacy answered, her voice sweet as if nothing was happening. "I just wanted to say I love you," I stammered, my voice cracking. "That's so sweet. I love you too," she replied warmly. "Yeah, I was just thinking about you and can't wait to see you tonight," I added, trying to sound casual. "I can't wait either, but I'm a little tied up right now." "Can I call you after lunch?" she asked, her tone shifting, distracted. "Sure, enjoy yourself. Bye." I forced myself to hang up, then looked back through the telescope. Stacy casually flipped her phone shut, and in the next moment, she leaned back in her chair, lost in pleasure as Tom continued his assault on her senses. I watched helplessly from across the street as my world crumbled. The last thing I saw was Stacy smoothing down her skirt and giving him a soft kiss. I must have blacked out because when I opened my eyes, Jess was beside me, her face pale with concern. "Boss, what happened?" "Maria's calling an ambulance," Jess said, her voice urgent. I I don't know. I think I passed out," I muttered, still dazed. "Just take it easy." "The paramedics are on their way," she reassured me, holding my hand. I closed my eyes, haunted by Stacy's betrayal, and let the tears flow. Jess stayed by my side, offering silent comfort, but I couldn't stop crying. Soon I heard voices as the paramedics arrived. They checked my vitals, placed an oxygen mask on me, and began their procedures. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" one of the paramedics asked, his voice calm and professional. "I was just looking out the window, and then everything went dark," I replied, trying to steady my voice. "Have you been under a lot of stress?" "Your blood pressure is sky high," he noted. "Well, yes, no, I'm not sure," I stammered, unsure how to explain. "How do you feel now?" he pressed on. "I'm fine," I lied, trying to sound convincing. "I probably should have started that blood pressure medication a while ago." "Sir, can you sit up? Let's check your pressure again," the paramedic urged, helping me to the couch. The reading was still high, but it had improved. I insisted I didn't want to go to the hospital. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" the fireman asked cautiously. "I'll be fine. I'll call my doctor." "Thanks for everything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. After they left, I slumped back onto the couch, with Jess still holding my hand. I forced a weak smile. "Are you sure you're okay?" Jess asked softly, concern clear in her eyes. "I don't know. I think I'll take the rest of the day off," I replied, feeling utterly drained. "No way," Maria interjected firmly from her spot by the window. "You're not going anywhere until you tell us what's really going on. We're your friends, Scott. You can't keep this to yourself." Jared, Casey, and Nick gathered around, all of them looking worried. "Nothing happened. I just passed out, that's all," I insisted, though my voice was shaky. "Bull," Maria shot back, pointing to the telescope by the window. "What did you see?" The overwhelming sadness and panic came rushing back, and I started to hyperventilate. "Scott, calm down," Jess whispered, trying to soothe me. "Whatever it is, we're here for you." "No, it's not going to be okay," I muttered, my whole body trembling. Maria joined Jess on the couch, wrapping an arm around my shoulders in an attempt to comfort me. "Jared, get some ice water. Casey, put the in-conference sign on the door. Nick, grab some chairs. We're having a team meeting," Maria ordered, taking control of the situation. Soon, we were all seated in a circle. Jess and Maria kept their arms around me, while Jess handed me the ice water. Maria gently turned my face toward hers. "Okay, Scott, no more BS. What did you see?" I told them everything, sparing no details. By the time I finished, I was too emotionally spent to cry, just staring at my hands, thinking about how my life had fallen apart. "What do you want to do now, Scott?" Maria asked softly. I had loved Stacy deeply and didn't want to lose her, but what I saw through that telescope changed everything. I needed to know the full truth about our marriage. "I have a problem, but I don't want to drag you all into it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Scott," Nick interrupted, looking me square in the eyes. "We're a team, and more than that, we're your friends. We'll help you through this. Just tell us what you need." "He's right, Scott," Jess added. "You might feel like your world is ending, but as long as you have friends, there's still hope. We'll stand by you, just like we always do." Silence filled the room as I thought about what to do next. I needed answers. Everything Stacy had been hiding. Only then could I decide my next steps. "I need to know everything," I finally said. "Who, how long, how many times, and most importantly, why? Why did she do this? Is it something I did wrong?" "Don't blame yourself," Maria said firmly. "You've always been a good man and a loyal friend. We'll get to the bottom of this, and no matter what, we'll be here for you." "All right, team," Jess said, taking charge. "Jared, Casey, and Nick, focus on what's happening at her workplace. Maria and I will handle the personal side. Let's regroup at 4:00. Scott, you need to rest in my office and stay away from that telescope. You've seen enough for now." I lay down on Jess's couch, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying the image of Stacy with that man. Her casual dismissal of me as she indulged in another's arms was seared into my brain. I couldn't escape it. At 4 a, Jared popped his head in to tell me the team was gathering in my office. I've always liked Jared, quiet but wise beyond his years. He took my hand and guided me down the hall. Back in my office, Maria took the lead, scribbling notes as we devised a plan to uncover Stacy's secrets. It felt surreal to be plotting this out, but I didn't object. I mostly listened as the team discussed the strategy. When they finished, everyone went off to their tasks, just like any other audit. My role was to act like everything was normal and supply the funds for any expenses. Scott, do you think you can go home tonight? Jess asked, her voice full of concern. I don't think I can face her, I muttered. I'll stay here until she's asleep, then sneak in. I don't trust myself not to say something I'll regret. Maybe you should take a business trip, she suggested. Get away for the weekend. I'll think of an excuse to avoid her. Thanks for the offer. If you need a place to stay, our guest room is always available, she offered. I stared out the window at Stacy's empty office, the painful images replaying in my mind over and over. I finally left the office after 9, relieved that Stacy was already asleep when I got home. I quietly gathered my clothes for the next day and took a long, hot shower without waking her. Then, I crashed in the guest room, unable to face her. I left before dawn, not wanting to confront her, and arrived at the Zenith offices before anyone else. I made some coffee, but deliberately avoided the telescope. By 9 chair, I checked in on Jared, who was busy at his computer. He smiled at me, but didn't say much. Around 10 so, Nick arrived with boxes of equipment. Silently, he set up a new high-tech telescope that connected to a computer monitor, allowing me to read Stacy's emails with perfect clarity. As he worked, Nick explained that, thanks to Jared's hacking skills, we'd soon have full access to Stacy's work network, letting us monitor everything without needing the telescope. He also set up a 60-inch monitor and left a big red button on my desk. Press this, he said. When I did, all the screens switched to display fake audit data, disguising our activities from anyone who might walk in. Satisfied, he left just before lunch. Maria and Jess arrived shortly after and took over the computer, focusing on Stacy's office. They watched intently as an older man with white hair entered the scene. I watched the screen, dreading that this older man might be here for the same reasons as the guy before. My stomach twisted at the thought. Scott, maybe you should step away for a bit, Jess said, looking at me with genuine concern. You don't want a repeat of yesterday. I'd hate to see your blood pressure spike again. I didn't say a word, just nodded and got up, leaving the room. An hour later, Jess joined me at her desk, where I had been aimlessly playing blackjack to distract myself. She wrapped her arms around me, resting her head on my shoulder. Jess, I don't know what to think anymore. I don't want to know, but at the same time, I need to know. Did anything happen? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. My heart sank, the weight of dread settling deep in my chest. What happened? I asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. BJ, she whispered softly, as if saying it any louder would make it even worse. The word hit me like a sledgehammer. I felt like my entire world was crumbling again. Scott, we recorded everything, Jess continued, her voice gentle. Nick set it all up just in case you need it later, maybe for legal reasons. But I really think you shouldn't watch it. It'll just make everything worse. She led me back to my office, which now looked like a war room with screens showing various angles of the building across the street. Jared explained, these are feeds from the security cameras on the 18th through 22nd floors. We can see almost everything except the restrooms and a few management offices. We can control the cameras and record whatever's necessary. Nick then called me over. We've got eyes on your wife's computer. We can see everything she's doing. Right now she's just working on an email, nothing unusual. But I'm downloading all her emails from the past 5 years. I've also synced her schedule with her phone, so we've got that too. Their security's a joke. I sat down at my desk, overwhelmed by everything that had transpired. Just then my phone rang. Quiet, everyone, Nick instructed the room. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Hello? Heh. Hi, honey, it's me, came Stacy's voice. I quickly glanced at the monitor and saw her sitting alone at her desk. Hey, what's up? I asked, doing my best to sound casual. You worked late last night, and I missed you, she said, her voice tinged with a hint of longing. Are you going to be late again tonight? I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, so I lied. Probably. This audit is really tough, and I might have to help Dad with some plumbing work this weekend. I'm sorry. Oh, I was hoping we could spend some time together, just the two of us. I even bought a new outfit I wanted to show you, she sighed, sounding disappointed. Maybe next weekend. Let's plan something special, I replied, forcing a smile into my voice, even though my chest felt like it was being crushed. Okay. Love you, bye, she said, her tone softening. I couldn't say it back. The words wouldn't come out. I watched as she hung up, noticing that this time she didn't flip off the phone. I realized it was because she wasn't with anyone else during our call. Just then, Casey burst into the room, looking triumphant. Someone pull up the second camera feed, she exclaimed, tossing me my house keys. I just finished wiring your house for audio and video. We can now monitor everything that happens there. Yeah, neat, I replied, my voice flat, unable to share in her excitement. Everyone spent the day at their computers, likely splitting their attention between watching Stacy and working on the audit. I hoped they were still focusing on the audit. One by one, they said goodnight and left. Jess was the last to go. Scott, you should get out and do something tonight, she said, standing in front of my desk. Don't drink too much, but try to take your mind off things. Maybe catch a movie. Tomorrow's Friday, and I'll be in early to wrap up my part of the audit. Take this weekend to figure out what you want to do. We'll talk on Monday. Remember, you're not alone. You've got friends. Good night. After she left, I sat there, trying to weigh my options. I even started writing down possible solutions with their pros and cons. But the emotional burden was too much. In the end, I left the paper on the desk and headed out around midnight. I took Jess's advice and went out for dinner, but I couldn't stomach much of the steak I ordered. When I got home, Stacy was already asleep again. I quietly packed a bag for the weekend, took a long shower, and crashed in the guest room. I left before she woke up, avoiding her as much as possible. Back at the office, I watched Stacy arrive through the telescope. She had her usual coffee and bagel and began reviewing her schedule. My heart sank when I saw the words, "Lunch with all four," marked on her calendar. Given her recent lunchtime activities, I knew this couldn't be good. Despite my team's concerns, I decided to watch whatever unfolded today. I called them together for a quick meeting. I can't keep doing this, I said, the stress evident in my voice. I'm going to watch today, alone if possible, but someone should be nearby in case I don't handle it well. This weekend I'll figure out my next move, and I may need your help. But if things get really bad, I want you all far away from the fallout. No arguments on that. Also, we need this audit done by next Friday, and all this equipment out of here. Everyone nodded and returned to their desks. As noon approached, I grew more anxious. At 11:30, Stacy vanished from view. Scott, I'm here to keep an eye on you, Jess said, locking the door behind her. Everyone else wanted to be here, but I insisted. We're all here for you. Her words brought me a small measure of comfort. A few minutes later, Stacy reappeared on the screen, now wearing the little black dress she'd mentioned on the phone. It was breathtaking, but not the kind of dress I'd want her to wear outside our home. Stacy looked incredible, yet deep down, I knew that she wasn't doing this for me. She was dressing up for someone else. As we watched, Jess gripped my hand, trembling as much as I was. Stacy seemed to be waiting for someone, and it wasn't long before the first man arrived, the same guy from before. They kissed, deeply and passionately. Soon after, a second man joined them, followed by a third, and finally, a fourth. That's when I realized what lunch with all four on her calendar really meant. My mind reeled as I watched Stacy kiss each man in turn, her laughter echoing in my ears, even though I couldn't hear it. She was at the center of their attention, clearly loving every minute of it. Jess leaned in, whispering that one of the men was the same as the day before, and the words she used sent a shiver down my spine. Stacy wasn't just mingling with colleagues. She was thriving in their admiration, and I was witnessing it all, my heart breaking more with each passing moment. The men settled into seats, two on the couch, two in office chairs, while Stacy stood near the window. She began to dance, moving rhythmically to music I couldn't hear. I'd seen her dance for me before, but this was different. She floated around the room, her fingers brushing across the men's shoulders as they reached out to touch her. Each time they did, I felt a sickening churn in my gut. Then, in the far corner, Stacy slowly undid the halter strap of her dress, letting it slip to the floor. Smiling, she began moving through the group, allowing each man to touch her. Every time they did, I flinched, the pain almost physical. Jess squeezed my hand tightly as we watched Stacy indulge in the attention, caressing her own body while the men looked on, their gazes hungry. It tore me apart, and then they started having sex. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Jess whispered, "It'll be over soon," her voice thick with sympathy as she tried to comfort me. But when I looked back at the screen, Stacy was with each man, one after the other. Jess held me close as tears streamed down my face, sharing in my agony. When it was over, Stacy casually retrieved her dress, wiped herself down, and changed back into her usual office clothes as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Our marriage was shattered beyond repair. My heart was pounding, but I felt oddly detached, almost numb. Jess's soft sobs pulled me back to reality. "It's done, Jess," I said quietly, my voice hollow. She looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not good, but I'm better than I was before," I admitted. "I'm just numb. This weekend is going to be rough." "What can I do?" she asked, her voice full of genuine care. "I can't go home," I replied, making a decision I'd been avoiding. "I'm going to my dad's place. He's always been level-headed. Maybe he can help me figure this out." "We're all here for you, Scott. Just say the word," she offered. "Thank you, Jess. And please, thank everyone else for me too," I said, deeply appreciative of their support. Jess nodded and left, giving me some space. A little while later, Nick came in and quietly started working at the computer. About half an hour passed before 4 pictures popped up on the large screen, along with an organizational chart from Stacy's company. "These are the 4 guys," Nick said, breaking the silence. "They're all her direct supervisors, just a step below upper management. I've got their personnel files, and we're digging up more on them. Everything's on your computer." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the faces of the men who had been with Stacy. I couldn't even bring myself to blame them. Who wouldn't want to be with her? It's just that she wasn't mine anymore, and I was spiraling into a dark place. Maria was the last to leave. She stopped by my desk to check on me and wished me well for the weekend. Once I was alone, the weight of it all came crashing down on me. I buried my face in my hands and let the tears fall, knowing I had to escape this nightmare. I watched Stacy pack up her dress, and then I called home, leaving a message that I'd be staying at my dad's. I called him next, and without needing to hear more, he told me to come over. 15 minutes later, I was on the road, driving away from everything. By Monday morning, I was back in the office, feeling more focused than I had in days. My dad had helped me sift through my thoughts, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. Now it was time to put the plan into action, and I needed my team to back me up. Casey found me making coffee, her eyes filled with concern. "You doing okay, Scott?" she asked. "I'm holding up. Thanks for checking in," I replied. Without a word, she pulled me into a hug. Her jewelry dug into my chest, but I didn't care. It was comforting. We broke apart when Jared appeared at the door, giving me a supportive smile as he walked me to my office. When Nick arrived, I asked him to gather everyone. We needed to talk strategy. Once we were all in my office, I laid out my plan. "Guys, I've made a decision," I began, with some guidance from my dad. "I'm meeting with a lawyer today to start the divorce process. I'll have the papers served to Stacy at her office during lunch, hoping to catch her during one of her meetings. Then I'll call her and tell her that I know everything. I'll give her an ultimatum. She can either choose me or her lovers. If she chooses me, she has to do 3 things: file a sexual harassment lawsuit against her supervisors, resign from her job, and give me a real explanation for what she did. If she agrees, I'll put the divorce on hold and see if there's anything left to salvage, though I'm not sure there is. If she refuses, I'll email videos of her encounters to everyone in her company and send copies to the wives of her supervisors. I know it's harsh, but I need them to feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling. Now, I need all the surveillance equipment removed from here and my house. Pack up everything related to Stacy separately, and Maria will keep it safe. Nick, can you handle the emails if it comes to that? It's already set up, Scott. Just hit a button and it'll be done. Completely untraceable. Thanks, Nick. Let's keep it simple. I hope I won't have to use it. Nick then added, I found out more about what's been going on. Stacy started this affair with her boss, Brad Paxton, after he dangled a promotion in front of her. It looks like it began last October, and over time, the other managers got involved, each one taking a spot on her lunch schedule. She hasn't been seeing anyone else, just these four. I've uploaded everything to your computer. And by the way, she spent a quiet weekend at home. No contact with anyone else. Thanks, Nick, I replied, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and despair. I nodded, processing everything. I appreciate all of you for sticking by me, I said, managing a small smile which they returned. Let's get to work. I want the landmass audit on my desk by 5 Warren. I'm heading home this afternoon to grab a few things, so someone needs to keep an eye on Stacy and call me if she leaves. Jess and Maria both spoke up simultaneously. No, Jess continued firmly. You're staying in our guest room. I've already changed the sheets. Once you've picked up what you need from your house, you're staying with us. No arguments. I knew better than to argue. All right, I'll call when I'm done, I said, conceding. The meeting wrapped up, and everyone got down to business. Nick stayed glued to his computer, setting up the email blast, while Jared and Casey dismantled and packed up the equipment, leaving only the telescope and monitor for when things escalated. Jess and Maria buried themselves in the landmass paperwork, and it became clear that we wouldn't be able to save landmass from their financial mess. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney for that afternoon. During lunch, Maria handed me my phone in Jared's office, steering me away from the telescope monitor. I'd seen more than enough. Scott, you need to call Stacy. Let's see if she reacts the same way as last time, Maria suggested reluctantly. I dialed her office. Stacy answered, sounding slightly out of breath, and my mind was flooded with painful images. After we hung up, Maria confirmed they had captured the footage they needed. I spent Monday and Tuesday nights working late, avoiding Stacy at all costs. By Wednesday at 12:15 p.m., everything was set to unfold. I prepared the final report for landmass, but left it on my desk, needing to finish my personal matters first. Nick informed me he could remotely unlock Stacy's office door using their building's electronic lock system. He was clearly pleased with himself, grinning more than usual. Wednesday morning passed in a tense silence. We had breakfast together and then returned to the office at landmass. At noon, Stacy's lover, Brad, arrived. We watched as they started talking, then moved into their affair. My anxiety spiked, worrying the process server might be late. Suddenly, the lovers panicked, scrambling to get dressed as a man in a suit entered the office. He handed Stacy a large envelope and left. Stacy sat down, stunned, while Brad looked baffled. When she opened the envelope, papers and photos spilled out. One photo showed her flipping off the phone. Another captured her in a compromising position with an older man. Stacy rushed to the window, her face filled with terror as she looked toward our building. Realizing she had been caught, I called her office. She hesitated before answering, her voice trembling. Tell Brad to leave, I ordered. Stacy collapsed into her chair before telling Brad to go. When he hesitated, she shouted at him to get out, warning him that I knew everything. After Brad left, Stacy turned to face the window. Stacy, listen carefully, I said, my voice cold. You have one chance to make this right. First, quit your job. Second, file a sexual harassment lawsuit against your 4 lovers at Enterprise. Third, explain to me why you did this. You have 5 minutes to start with the first step. I could hear her sobbing, and I hovered over the enter key, ready to send the videos to everyone at Enterprise if she didn't comply. I waited, giving her a moment to respond. Her first words on the phone were, "But Scott, I've invested so much in Enterprise. I'm going to be—" I pressed enter and hung up. Okay, everyone, I said, my voice steady. Let's pack up the rest of the equipment and head home. Take the rest of the day off. I have a meeting with the landmass executives at 2 to deliver the bad news. See you all back at the office tomorrow. I glanced at the telescope display and saw Stacy screaming at her office window. Nick mercifully turned off the monitor, but I couldn't stop staring at the blank screen. Before I could react, my entire team, my expert accountants, tech wizards, and closest friends, gathered around and embraced me. Even Nick. They understood the gravity of what had just happened and shared in my sorrow. In that moment, I felt more love and support than ever before. With them by my side, I knew I could get through anything. I finally let go, allowing the tears to fall. For the past year, my life has been unraveling, and I know I played a part in it. I destroyed my marriage, my career, and my peace of mind. There's no going back to the way things were, but I'm determined to try and rebuild. A year ago, while I was entangled in this mess, a man walked into my office. I thought I'd locked the door, but Brad and I scrambled to dress as the man smirked and handed me an envelope. "You've been served, ma'am," he said with a grin. That was the moment my world came crashing down. Since then, I've been drifting through life, haunted by my past and lost in the present. It's only recently, with therapy, that I've started to piece together where it all went wrong. Now, I need to revisit every painful detail to rebuild my life. As the flight attendant droned on with safety instructions, I tuned out, focusing on sorting through my thoughts before landing. Where did it all begin? My therapist says it started long before, but I'm focused on the events that led to me betraying my husband. It was a cloudy Friday in October when my supervisor, Brad Paxton, called me into his office just before lunch. After working under him for 8 years, I was caught off guard when he told me I was his top choice to replace Ambrose St. John, who was retiring as logistics supervisor. Excited, I asked what I could do to prove I was the right person for the job. Brad suggested discussing it over lunch at La Tour, a fancy restaurant in Boston. The following Wednesday, at lunch, Brad had wine waiting for us. He asked about my life, my dreams, and my ambitions. Then, leaning in closer, he asked, "What are you willing to do for my recommendation?" "I work hard," I replied, trying to keep things professional. But there was no mistaking Brad's insinuation. Back in my office, I realized what he was implying: sex. I spent the weekend wrestling with the idea, weighing the pros and cons, but by Monday I convinced myself I could separate work from my personal life. At lunch, I confronted Brad directly. "Did you mean sex by anything?" I asked. Brad grinned, confirming my suspicion. "I set strict conditions. Only at work, only during lunch, and no one else could know. It would end whenever I decided." Brad agreed, and that's how it started. Our first time together was anything but memorable. Awkward, filled with nerves and fumbling. Afterward, I cried for the first time since getting married, but I justified it as a necessary sacrifice to advance my career. I convinced myself that my marriage was already on shaky ground, a lie I told myself to ease the guilt. Over time, our meetings became routine. One day, Scott called while I was with Brad. I hurried through the conversation, flipping off the phone afterward, and lied to Brad, saying that Scott and I weren't getting along. Not long after, Ambrose, one of the senior managers, found out about the affair. He threatened to expose us unless I allowed him to join in. With no real choice, I complied. Later, I discovered that Ambrose had no concrete evidence, but by then, it was too late. He had manipulated me into adding him to the mix. In January, Ambrose introduced another manager, Tom, into our arrangement, and soon both of them were taking turns with me. Now I had 3 office lovers. By Monday, I began to dread the week ahead, especially Tuesdays, when Tom was scheduled. Yet, when Tom arrived, I was surprised by how much I desired him. Afterward, guilt overwhelmed me, and I couldn't meet his gaze. "Did I hurt you?" Tom asked, concerned. I forced a smile. "No, I'm okay," I replied, though tears welled up in my eyes. Wednesday was Brad's day, Thursday was Ambrose's, and I started to wonder if they were comparing notes. Then one Friday, all 3 showed up together, and I entertained them simultaneously. The only manager not involved was David Loretta, but that changed when he came by one Monday expecting the same treatment. Now I had 4 lovers. That evening, Scott messaged me, saying he was going to his father's for the weekend. I didn't think much of it, made dinner, watched some TV, and realized how much I missed him. Without Scott around, it felt like a piece of my heart was missing. Before bed, I took a long bubble bath and found myself fantasizing about him. Then, on Wednesday, everything fell apart. Brad and I had just started our usual lunchtime meeting when a man in a cheap suit walked into my office. "I locked the door," I exclaimed as Brad and I scrambled to get dressed. The man smirked, standing by my desk. "What do you want?" I demanded. "Are you Stacy Hughes?" he asked calmly. "Yes, that's my name." "Who are you?" He handed me a manila envelope. After a moment's hesitation, I took it. "Ma'am, you've been served," he said before leaving. I collapsed into my chair, trembling as I opened the envelope. On top was a divorce petition. I was too stunned to speak, trying to grasp what was happening. Brad asked what it was, but I couldn't respond. Then, I saw the photos, images of me with Ambrose, clear as day. The reality hit me hard. "How did he get these?" I muttered, staring out the window. Across the street, another building loomed, and I realized the photos had been taken from there. Panic set in as I pressed my hands against the glass. The phone rang, and I knew who it was. Slowly, I answered, my hand trembling. "Tell Brad to leave," Scott growled on the other end. "Brad, go away," I whispered, my voice shaking. "It's my husband." Brad hesitated, but I snapped, "Just go. He knows everything." After Brad left, I waited for Scott to speak. "Stacy," his voice was cold, "you have one chance to save everything, understand?" "Yes," I sobbed. "Quit your job, file sexual harassment lawsuits, and explain why you did this. You have 5 minutes to start." I hesitated, desperation in my voice. "But Scott, I've invested so much in Enterprise. I'm about to become the first female manager." But the line was already dead. Desperately, I screamed at the window, realizing I had destroyed everything. Scott knew everything, and he was leaving me. "What have I done?" I wailed, collapsing into a heap of despair. A knock on the door interrupted my breakdown. Ambrose stood there, glaring at me, the entire office watching. "You filthy liar," he spat before slapping me hard across the face, knocking me to the floor. Tom and Brad quickly dragged him out, but not before a coworker sneered, "Now I'm sure to get that promotion." Everyone knew, but all I could think about was that Scott was leaving me. I tried calling him repeatedly, but he never answered. Then I saw an email notification. Hoping it was Scott, I opened it. But instead of a message from him, it was a video of me with Brad. Horrified, I watched until the screen faded to black, ending with Porky Pig saying, "That's all, folks." I collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. Security arrived shortly after, giving me an hour to pack my things and handing me a termination letter. Through my tears, I gathered my belongings, realizing that 9 years of work at Enterprise had just vanished. But it wasn't just my job I had lost. I had ruined everything with Scott, too. Desperate to talk to him, I rushed home, but he was already gone. All he left behind was a note. "Stacy, don't contact me. Call my lawyer, sign the divorce papers, and let's end this quickly. You've done enough damage. Scott." I was devastated and cried for days. The divorce papers cited irreconcilable differences instead of infidelity, sparing me from some additional humiliation. A week after leaving Enterprise, a lawyer contacted me about a sexual harassment suit against the company. Somehow he had all the evidence, and I couldn't help but suspect Scott was behind it. We settled for $100,000. Enterprise fired 3 managers, and Ambrose quietly retired. Afterward, I tried calling Scott's lawyer, hoping to arrange a conversation with Scott. But the lawyer's response was always cold. "Why did you flip off the phone?" Every time I called, he would ask the same question until I eventually gave up. A month later, I reached out to my cousin in Cincinnati. She invited me to move in with her. After a week of consideration, I signed the divorce papers, packed my things, and left most of my belongings behind for Scott. I left a note asking him to call me, but he never did. In Cincinnati, I spiraled into a deep depression and even attempted to take my own life. My cousin found me in time and called paramedics. While in the hospital, I started therapy and began slowly coming to terms with what I had done. I realized that I didn't actually want to die. I wanted to live, and deep down, I wanted to try to get Scott back. My therapist helped me create a plan to understand why I had made such terrible choices and to rebuild my life, though he warned me that winning Scott back might not be possible. 4 months after leaving Boston, I received the final divorce papers. The settlement granted me $100,000, but no alimony or stake in Scott's business. We agreed to sell the house and split the profits. After 2 months of therapy, I still felt like I was standing amidst the ruins of my old life. As I flew back to Boston, I replayed everything in my mind, knowing I had made huge mistakes, but also recognizing how far I'd come in understanding them. I hoped Scott would be willing to listen to my story, though I knew it was unlikely. The plane ride felt endless, and as we neared our landing, I kept wishing for a different outcome, even though I knew I had to face reality. The captain announced our descent, waking me from a brief nap. I realized I had been crying. A woman beside me handed me a tissue and gently said, "Whatever troubles we have, God watches over us. Just talk to Him." As the plane landed, I reflected on everything again, hoping to find some clarity, but nothing had really changed. I was still a liar, a cheat, and someone who had ruined lives, all because I wanted to feel important. Now I was nobody. My name was Stacy Smith again after the divorce, and losing my married name hurt more than I ever expected. I didn't want alimony, the condo, or savings. I just wanted Scott, but that wasn't possible anymore. I rented a car and drove toward Waltham, where my old home was. The drive took 25 minutes, but when I arrived, I couldn't bring myself to move. I sat in the car, too scared to face what I had come all this way for. I rehearsed how I would greet Scott, finally settling on, "Hi, Scott. I'm here to apologize. Can we talk?" Taking a deep breath, I approached the door. Everything looked the same, except the azaleas I had planted were gone. I rang the doorbell and waited nervously. A tall man answered the door. "Yes?" he asked, puzzled. This wasn't Scott. "Where's Scott?" I blurted out, my heart sinking. Another man, heavier and also in a robe, joined him. "Can we help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for Scott Hughes," I stammered. "Mr. Hughes moved out 6 months ago," the second man replied. "We moved in after the new year." I stood there, speechless. Finally, I said, "I'm his wife. Well, I used to be. I came to talk." The men exchanged awkward looks. "We heard about you," one of them said apologetically. They kindly offered to let me in for coffee, but I declined, asking if they knew Scott's new address. They didn't. I thanked them and walked back to my car, another tear sliding down my cheek. I drove off, unsure where to go. I ended up at a small restaurant Scott and I used to visit. As I drank my coffee, memories of our time together flooded back, and I thought about trying to find Scott at his office. Finishing my coffee quickly, I headed downtown, anxiety bubbling up as I passed my old workplace. The last time I was there was during the legal meetings for my sexual harassment case, a memory filled with nothing but pain and regret. I parked near Scott's office and hesitated before going inside. The security guard at the front desk recognized me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't think he's in today," the guard said, his tone neutral, "but you're welcome to check." When I reached Scott's office, the door was locked and the lights were off. The nameplate now read Hughes and Associates instead of Scott Hughes, CPA. My stomach twisted. What did that mean? Back in my car, I felt lost. After a moment, I decided to try reaching out to Jess, one of Scott's employees. I still had her contact information saved as his emergency contact. Entering her address into the GPS, I drove off, hoping she could help. When I arrived at Jess's house, a young girl in a soccer uniform answered the door and called for her mom. Jess appeared a few moments later, her face hardening the instant she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold and sharp. Taking a deep breath, I said, "I'm looking for Scott. I came to apologize, to talk to him. Do you know where he is?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "Yes, I know where he is, but I'm not telling you. You've done enough damage, Stacy. Scott's moved on, and you need to leave him alone. You're nothing but a bad memory now." With that, she slammed the door in my face. I stood there, stunned, before stumbling back to my car. As I drove away, the tears came hard and fast, so much so that I had to pull over into a fast food parking lot just to calm down. After what felt like hours, an older man tapped on my window, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked gently. "I'll be okay," I lied, though I didn't believe it. I was far from okay. Desperate for any connection to Scott, I thought of his father and decided to drive to his house. But when I arrived, a for sale sign was staked in the front yard, and the house was empty. Panic welled up inside me as I knocked on a neighbor's door. The elderly woman who answered informed me that Scott's father had passed away 3 months ago. I thanked her, my voice trembling, and drove to the cemetery where I knew he would be buried. At the cemetery, I found the fresh grave, the headstone newly engraved. A basket of flowers from Scott and his sister sat nearby, with a florist's card attached. Clinging to the last shred of hope, I drove to the florist, thinking it might be my only chance to find Scott. At the florist's shop, a young man behind the counter listened politely as I explained my situation. When I asked for Scott's address, he shook his head. "I'm sorry, but we can't give out customer information." Desperation took over, and I pulled out a $100 bill, sliding it across the counter. He hesitated, then sighed and wrote down Scott's address. "Please don't mention where you got this," he said softly. I followed the GPS to a charming white bungalow. The mailbox confirmed it was Scott's, but there was no car in the driveway, and the house was dark. I decided to wait, sitting on the porch, my thoughts racing. As I walked around the house, memories of our life together flooded back. Plants from our old home, a sundial with Scott's favorite quote. But this wasn't our life anymore. This was his life, without me. Needing to clear my head, I walked to a nearby park and sat at a picnic table, shaped like a turtle, the weight of my choices crushing me. Tears streamed down my face as I thought about the life we'd planned but never lived. Overwhelmed, I buried my face in my hands, feeling like life without Scott wasn't worth living. Suddenly, a hand touched my shoulder. I looked up to see Scott standing there, his face a mix of emotions. I jumped up, choking on his name as I sobbed, telling him how much I missed him, how much I still loved him. He pulled me into a hug, holding me as I cried. But I noticed Jess, Maria, and another woman watching us from a distance, their faces hard and unforgiving. "Hi, Stacy," Scott said quietly, his voice careful. "Would you like to come inside?" Clinging to him, I nodded, and he led me back to the house. Once inside, he gently suggested I freshen up in the bathroom. I washed my face, trying to pull myself together. When I came out, Scott was waiting for me. "Let's go out onto the deck," he said softly. "We need to talk." We walked through the kitchen, where the women were preparing food, their eyes following us in silence. We stepped onto the deck, and for a long time neither of us spoke. Finally, Scott broke the silence. "How have you been, Stacy?" "I'm better now, Scott." "How about you?" I replied, my voice shaky but controlled. "I'm doing all right," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But I don't think you came here to ask how I'm doing. Tell me what's been going on since everything fell apart." I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "Scott, I don't know how much you've heard, so I'll start from the beginning. The sexual harassment case against Enterprise settled out of court, and I used the money to start over in Cincinnati. I found a job at a software company, and it's been good for me." I paused, hoping for some reaction, but Scott remained silent, his eyes unreadable. "I've been seeing a psychologist since I left Boston," I continued. "He's helped me realize that everything that happened was my fault. You didn't deserve any of it. I'm the one to blame." I struggled to keep my emotions in check. "I know I've apologized before, but this time, I mean it more than ever. I'm so sorry, Scott, for everything I put you through." Tears welled up, but I pressed on. "After you found out, I fell apart. I even tried to take my own life, but my therapist helped me understand that it was a desperate act, not something meant to hurt you any further." Scott looked down, his expression softening just a bit. "My therapist helped me see that my low self-esteem led me to make terrible decisions. I thought sleeping with Brad would secure a promotion, but I later found out I was already recommended. Everything spiraled out of control, and I made awful choices." Scott shifted slightly, but still said nothing. "I'm not trying to make excuses. I wasn't forced into anything. I made those decisions on my own. And when you sent that email, I realized how deeply I had hurt you. I would have accepted any punishment if you'd just listened to my apology." I paused, gathering my thoughts. I ruined the lives of those men and their families, just like I ruined ours. All because I wanted that promotion. The lies I told you were cruel, and I'm deeply sorry for that. I hope you can find it in your heart to trust me again one day. But I'll understand if you can't, I said, trying to steady my breath as I fought back more tears. There's something I need you to know. What I did with those men, it meant nothing. It was just physical, empty. But being with you, Scott, that was real. That was love. They used me. But with you, it was different. It was everything. Tears blurred my vision as I continued. I never told them I loved them. Those words were only for you, and I meant them every time. This past year has been hell without you. I'll do anything to make things right. Just give me a chance. Let me back into your life. Please, Scott, I still love you. I broke down, my words choking in my throat. Scott remained silent, letting me cry without interrupting. Scott, I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I wasn't going to break down like this. And I'm so sorry about your father. He was an incredible man, and I visited his grave to pay my respects. That's how I found out where you live now. Please, if there's any part of you that still cares, let me come back. I just want to be with you again. I love you. I buried my face in my hands, the tears coming uncontrollably now. Scott listened without saying a word, his silence making it impossible for me to gauge what he was feeling. I was too afraid to look up, unsure of whether he was angry, sad, or indifferent. Just then, Maria appeared at the door. Excuse me, dinner's ready if you want to eat, she announced, her tone neutral. Scott looked at me with a gentleness that made my heart ache. Do you want to take a break? We can have dinner and continue this afterward. I'd like to clean up first, I said, trying to compose myself. Scott led me to the bathroom, and I took a few moments to wash my face and gather my thoughts. When I returned, we headed to the dining room where 5 people were already seated, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and judgment. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the silence was suffocating. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like sawdust. Scott sat across from me, his expression unreadable, which only added to my anxiety. After dinner, the tension only grew more palpable. Jess and Maria cornered me near the fridge, their hostility unmistakable. Jess's eyes bore into mine as she spoke, her voice low and dangerous. I want you out of here as soon as this is over, she said. If you hurt Scott again, you'll regret it. I'll make sure of that. Maria chimed in, her tone just as menacing. If you make him suffer, even for a second, I'll find you, and I'll make you pay. He's moved on, Stacy. You need to let him go. The others watched from a distance, their expressions cold, making me feel trapped. I knew I had to stay calm, stay focused on Scott. He returned just in time, sensing the rising tension. Stacy, let's finish our conversation outside, he said, his voice steady. I followed him out to the deck, relieved to be away from the suffocating atmosphere inside. Stacy, I appreciate your honesty today, Scott began, his tone measured. I can see that you've changed, but I need you to answer one question honestly before we go any further. My heart pounded as I braced myself. Okay, I whispered. Scott's eyes locked onto mine, his gaze piercing. Why did you flip me off after our call when you were with those men? I had dreaded this question, but I knew it was coming. Scott, that was one of the worst things I've ever done, I confessed, my voice heavy with shame. I convinced myself that you were a bad husband, that you didn't care about me, to justify what I was doing. But it was all a lie. I'm so sorry you had to see that. Scott nodded slowly, taking in my words. I believe you're telling the truth, but that moment of disrespect cut deeper than anything else. It made it almost impossible for me to move on from what you did. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. Is that why you wouldn't speak to me? I asked, my voice trembling. Partly, Scott admitted. I was so full of rage. I didn't want to say something I couldn't take back. It took a lot of time and support from my friends to get me to this point. We both sat there, absorbing the weight of the conversation. All right, Stacy, Scott finally said, his voice calm but firm. Let me tell you what my life has been like this past year. I listened intently as he began to recount his side of the story. When I hit send on those emails with the videos of you and those men, I was in a blind rage. I've never felt anger like that before, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I was so furious, I didn't care about the consequences. I wanted to destroy everything, everything you cared about, including myself. He paused, staring at his hands as if they were stained with the memories. I wanted you to feel the pain I felt. Sending those emails to your supervisors was my way of getting back at the men who took you from me, who helped destroy our marriage. I blamed you, but I blamed them too. Everyone suffered because of it, including me. Scott sighed, the weight of his actions evident in his voice. After that, the calls and emails started. Threats, accusations. Some came from your coworkers, others from the friends of those men. I tried to apologize to their wives, but they were too hurt, too angry to listen. One of them even spit in my face. But those emails, they used them in their divorce cases. It was all so messy, he continued, his voice filled with regret. I stayed at my dad's for a while, trying to pull myself together. He helped me calm down, but eventually I knew I had to face things on my own. By the time I returned, you were already gone. I didn't try to find you or call. In some twisted way, I was relieved you were gone, even though it left a massive void inside me. Scott's voice softened as he continued. I cried for days until my friends staged an intervention. Jess and Maria practically mothered me, and Jared made sure I ate, exercised, and kept up with work. Even Casey tried to pull me out of my funk. Nick brought over DVDs and beer, and we had a guy's weekend. It was cathartic. After 3 months of wallowing in self-pity, I finally started to live again. Scott took a deep breath before continuing. I sold our condo after you signed the divorce papers. It took some time, but by then I was already living here. Moving was the fresh start I desperately needed. When I received the final divorce notice, I almost slipped back into depression, but Jared helped me stay on track. He paused, then added, Oh, and I should tell you, your video ended up on an amateur site. Nick found it, but I didn't post it. I'm sorry it got out, but I can give you the URL if you want. Scott sighed again, his expression resolute. I put your share of the condo sale, $22,000, in the bank. I'll write you a check tonight. I didn't send it earlier because I didn't want to face you. He looked me in the eye, and his voice was calm but firm. You asked me to forgive you, Stacy. I do forgive you, but not for your sake. It's for mine. I can't carry that hate anymore. But I need you to understand. I don't love you anymore either. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Forgiveness without love. Forgiving you doesn't mean forgetting, he continued softly. What I saw in those videos destroyed every good memory we ever had. Our hopes, our dreams, everything we built, gone. I've let go of the hate, but I'm also done with love. I'm moving on, Stacy, and there won't be a Mrs. Scott Hughes with your name. I sat there, utterly devastated, sobbing quietly as the reality of his words sank in. My life, as I had known it, was truly over. Scott handed me some tissues and quietly left me alone. When I finally looked up, I saw him in the kitchen, surrounded by his friends. The young woman who had been there earlier leaned her head on his shoulder, and it finally hit me. He had moved on. I cried until the sky outside darkened, then pulled myself together just enough to leave. In the living room, Scott handed me an envelope with my share of the condo sale inside, along with the URL for the video scrawled on the back. Just like that, it was over. Any hope I had of winning him back was gone, along with the last shred of my dignity. I realized I had to start over without him. Scott walked me to my car. I held his hand for what I knew would be the last time, whispered goodbye, and kissed his cheek. As I opened the car door, I hesitated and turned to look back. What I saw shattered me completely. Scott stood with his arm around the young woman's waist, his friends behind him, each flipping me off. The message was clear. Screw off. Now I truly understood Scott's pain.